The gavel struck the wooden block with the finality of a judge's sentence, and Abigail Harper stood trembling on the auction platform, her wrists bound by coarse rope. The men below her shouted bids as if she were a prized heifer, their voices coarse and hungry under the unrelenting September sun. But when Amos Caldwell raised his hand and called out a price that silenced the entire crowd, no one in Willow Creek could have foreseen the chain of events that would unravel. The dusty town square had witnessed auctions before land, livestock, even foreclosed homes, but never a young woman's future sold to the highest bidder. And Amos Caldwell, a widowed rancher with a reputation as solid as the Rockies, was about to turn their quiet community upside down. Willow Creek, Colorado, was a place where debts were settled with sweat or blood, and Abigail's father, Henry Harper, had left behind a legacy of both. A gambler with a silver tongue, he'd borrowed from every lender in the territory, promising riches that never materialized. When he died in a saloon brawl, his debts fell to his 19-year-old daughter, who had no family left to shield her. Judge Elias Thornton, a man whose moral compass bent toward profit, had declared the auction to settle Henry's estate. Abigail stood on that platform, her auburn hair catching the light, her green eyes fixed on the warped boards beneath her feet. She refused to meet the gazes of the men below, knowing most weren't bidding for a maid or a cook. The whispers had started weeks ago. A young, unmarried woman with no protector was fair game in a town where law bode to greed. Amos Caldwell stood at the edge of the crowd, his weathered face unreadable beneath a wide-brimmed hat. At 47, he was one of the most respected men in 3 counties, a rancher who'd built a 1,000-acre spread from nothing. His wife, Clara, had died for years prior, taken by a fever that spared no one in its path. Since then, Amos had worked his land alone, hiring hands when he could afford them. But the townsfolk noticed the solitude that clung to him like dust. They speculated about when her wife had taken another wife. As the bidding began, Amos watched in silence, his dark eyes scanning the scene with a purpose no one could name. The auction started low, with coarse laughter punctuating the bids. Tom Brennan, the saloon owner with a reputation for cruelty, called out $15. Old Caleb Weaver, who'd buried 2 wives already, raised it to $20. The crowd grew restless as the price climbed, some men shifting uncomfortably as their pockets emptied. That's when Eleanor Grayson, the sharp-eyed widow who ran the boarding house, noticed Amos step forward. She'd known him for 20 years, had seen him mourn Clara with a grief that aged him overnight. But the look on his face, now jaw-set, eyes locked on Abigail, was something new. It wasn't lust or pity. It was resolve. When the bidding hit $40, most men backed off. $40 was more than a year's wages for some, a fortune in a town where survival demanded frugality. But Amos raised his hand, his voice cutting through the dry air like a whip. $50. The crowd fell silent. Judge Thornton's eyebrows shot up, his gavel hovering. Even Abigail lifted her gaze, her eyes meeting Amos's for the first time. There was something in his expression, steadiness, perhaps, that set him apart from the leering faces around him. It wasn't comfort, but it was different from the terror she'd felt under the others' stares. Thornton called for higher bids, but no one dared challenge Amos. $50 was a king's ransom, and the men assumed Amos would tire of the girl within months, leaving her to the wolves again. The gavel fell, sold to Amos Caldwell. As the crowd dispersed, Eleanor Grayson watched Amos approach the platform. She'd made it her business to know everyone's secrets, and she'd seen men buy land, horses, even loyalty. But the way Amos helped Abigail down, his hands steady, but not possessive, sent a chill through her. This wasn't a transaction. This was a plan. And whatever Amos Caldwell was planning, it would shake Willow Creek to its core. The wagon ride to Amos's ranch was a silent ordeal for Abigail. She sat rigid beside him, her hands clenched in her lap, her knuckles white as bone. Every jolt of the dirt road sent panic spiking through her. Amos hadn't spoken since they left town, his calloused hands guiding the reins, his eyes fixed on the horizon. Abigail stole glances at his profile, searching for some hint of his intentions. But his face was a mask. Behind them, she knew Willow Creek was already abuzz. Eleanor Grayson would be holding court at her boarding house. dissecting the auction for anyone with a nickel to spare. The men who'd been outbid would be drowning their frustrations in whiskey, while their wives whispered about what Amos Caldwell wanted with a girl half his age. Abigail had learned about fear in the months since her father's death. It wasn't the sharp, immediate terror of a knife to the throat. It was the slow, grinding certainty that her life was no longer hers. Every choice had been stripped away, leaving her a commodity to be bartered. When Amos's ranch came into view, her breath caught. It wasn't the crude shack she'd braced herself for, but a sturdy two-story house with a wide porch and windows that gleamed in the afternoon sun. Cottonwood trees shaded the yard, and cattle grazed in pastures that stretched toward the distant San Juan Mountains. It was a place where people could build a life. That realization terrified her more than any auction block. Amos brought the wagon to a stop and climbed down without a word. Abigail hesitated, unsure if she was meant to follow or wait for orders. When he turned back, his expression softened, but his eyes held something unreadable. He offered his hand to help her down, and she took it, startled by the gentleness of his touch. It wasn't the grasping, entitled grip she'd feared, but it didn't ease her suspicion. Kindness could be a trap, and she'd learned to distrust anything that came with a price. Inside, the house felt vast and hollow. A massive stone fireplace dominated the main room, flanked by furniture that spoke of comfort rather than necessity. But the air was heavy with absence, as if the walls themselves mourned. Amos hung his head on a peg by the door and met Abigail's gaze. For the first time, she saw something in his eyes that made her stomach twist, not desire or cruelty, but a weight, a burden he'd carried so long it had become part of him. And somehow, she was now tied to that burden. What he said next shattered every assumption she'd made about why he'd bought her. Amos gestured to a chair by the fireplace, his voice rough, like a man unused to speaking. "You'll have the room upstairs, at the end of the hall. It has a lock on the inside." Abigail blinked, certain she'd misheard. A lock on the inside? That made no sense for the fate she'd braced herself for. She remained standing, her body taut with suspicion. "I don't understand," she whispered. Amos moved to the mantel, where a faded photograph of a woman with gentle eyes watched over the room. He touched the frame, and his shoulders sagged with a grief that seemed to live in his bones. "My wife, Clara, died 4 years ago. Fever took her, slow and cruel, until there was nothing left to save." His voice broke, but he pressed on. "Before she passed, she made me promise something I thought I could never keep." Abigail's heart pounded as she waited, the silence stretching like a taut wire. Outside, the wind rustled the cottonwoods, whispering secrets she couldn't decipher. "Clara wanted a daughter," Amos continued. "We tried for years, but it wasn't meant to be. When she was dying, she begged me to find a girl who needed a home, a family. Said she couldn't rest knowing there were young women out there with no one to protect them." The words hit Abigail like a physical blow. She stumbled back, collapsing into the chair. She'd prepared for violation, degradation, even death. But thick-skinnedness, protection felt like a cruel trick. "I don't believe you," she said, her voice barely audible. Amos turned from the photograph, pain etched into his weathered face. "I know how it looks. A man my age buying a girl young enough to be his daughter. The town's probably spinning tales already. But Judge Thornton wouldn't have let you go any other way. He's got debts of his own, and auctioning you was the fastest way to settle your father's estate. If I hadn't bid, you'd be in a worse place right now." Abigail wanted to believe him. Every fiber of her being craved the safety he offered. But she'd learned that men's words were cheap, and their promises cheaper still. Her father had sworn to provide for her, right up until he'd gambled away their home. "What do you want in return?" she asked, her voice steadying. "Nobody does something for nothing." Amos was silent, his gaze returning to Clara's photograph. When he spoke, his words carried the weight of a man wrestling with impossible choices. "I want to honor my wife's dying wish, and maybe find some peace in doing right by someone who needs it." But before Abigail could respond, the sound of hoof beats broke the quiet. Multiple riders, moving fast toward the house. Her blood turned to ice. Someone was coming, and whatever sanctuary Amos offered was about to be tested. 6 men on horseback thundered into the yard, led by Deputy Marshal Virgil Kane. Behind him rode faces Abigail recognized from the auction. their expressions twisted with whiskey and malice. Amos moved to the rifle rack by the door, his motions calm but deliberate. "Stay away from the windows," he told Abigail quietly. "And whatever happens, don't let them see you're afraid." Kane dismounted, his spurs clinking against the porch steps. Abigail had seen him in town, a man who wore his badge like a license to take what he wanted. Behind him, Tom Brennan spat tobacco into the dirt, his bloodshot eyes scanning the house. "Caldwell," Kane called. "We need to talk about that girl you bought today." Amos opened the door but didn't invite them in. Abigail pressed herself against the wall by the fireplace, close enough to hear but hidden from view. Her heart felt like it might burst. "What about her, Deputy?" Amos asked, his voice steady. "Seems there's concerns about the auction's legality," Kane said, his tone smug. "Judge Thornton might have overstepped. We're here to take the girl back to town for proper processing." Abigail's breath caught. It was a lie. Whatever processing they had in mind wouldn't happen in a courthouse. The auction was legal, recorded, and witnessed. "The girl's debt was settled fairly," Amos replied. "Maybe so," Brennan called, his voice thick with menace. "But a man your age keeping a young girl like that don't sit right with decent folks. We need to check on her welfare." The threat was clear. Abigail closed her eyes, feeling the trap tightening. She'd thought Amos might be different, but how could one man stand against six? And why would he risk his life for her? "You boys can ride back to town," Amos said, his tone colder. "The girl stays here." Kane laughed, a sound like splintering wood. "You don't understand, Caldwell. We ain't asking." Abigail heard the click of a rifle being cocked. Through the window, she saw Amos step onto the porch, his weapon ready but not aimed. "And you don't understand my position," he said. "This is my property, and the girl's under my protection. You want her, you'll need a federal warrant, not some flimsy excuse about welfare." The tension was palpable. Abigail held her breath, torn between terror and a flicker of hope. No one had ever stood up for Hernet, her father, not the law. But if she were in her shoes, would she trust Amos to protect her and stay hidden, or step forward to prevent bloodshed that might get him killed? The choice loomed like a shadow. Before she could decide, Abigail found herself moving. She stepped into the doorway, her presence silencing the yard. 6 pairs of eyes turned to her, predatory and unyielding. But instead of cowering, she lifted her chin and spoke with a steadiness that surprised her. "I'm staying here willingly. Mr. Caldwell has treated me with nothing but respect." Kane's face darkened. "Girl, you don't know what's good for you. A man like Caldwell has appetites." "Deputy Kane," Amos cut in, his voice sharp as a blade. "You're on my land, threatening my family. Choose your next words carefully." "Family." The word struck Abigail like a thunderbolt, warm and disorienting. When had anyone claimed her as family? Brennan spat again, his hand near his gun. "This is nonsense, Caldwell. You can't just buy a wife and expect." "She's not my wife," Amos said, calm but firm. "She's my ward, legal and proper, witnessed by the town." But Kane's eyes gleamed with calculation. 6 against 1 liked his odds. Abigail's stomach sank as she realized he was ready to act. Then, the sound of more horses reached them from the road. Her heart plummeted, expecting Kane's allies, but Amos's posture shifted. A hint of relief in his stance. Sheriff Jonah Ramsey rode into the yard with 2 deputies, his weathered face assessing the scene with the sharpness of a man who'd tamed trouble for decades. Ramsey was incorruptible, a rarity in a territory where money bought loyalty. "Deputy Kane," he said, his voice carrying 30 years of authority. "What brings you to Caldwell's ranch with an armed posse?" Kane's bravado faltered. "Sheriff, we're checking on the girl's welfare, ensuring everything's legal." Ramsey's eyes moved to Abigail, reading the truth in her posture. "Miss, are you here against your will?" "No, sir," she replied, her voice stronger. "Mr. Caldwell has given me a home and asked nothing improper." The sheriff nodded, turning to Kane. "Then your business here is done, unless you've got a warrant I haven't seen." "Now, see here," Kane began. "No, you see here," Ramsey interrupted, his tone unyielding. "You're harassing a citizen on his property without cause. Ride back to town before I investigate what's really going on." Kane's face flushed, but he knew better than to challenge Ramsey. After a tense moment, he mounted his horse, his eyes burning with promise. "This ain't over, Caldwell. A girl like that'll bring you nothing but trouble." As the posse rode off, Abigail's knees weakened with relief. Ramsey dismounted, his expression grave. "Caldwell, Miss Harper," he said, tipping his hat. "Kane's right about one thing. The situation will bring more trouble than you bargained for." And with those words, Abigail realized their fight was far from over. Ramsey accepted Amos's offer of coffee, but his hands trembled as he held the cup. Abigail noticed, her stomach knotting. Whatever news he carried rattled a man who'd faced outlaws without blinking. "Miss Harper," he began, "what do you know about your father's dealings before he died?" Abigail frowned, sifting through memories. "He said he was investing in a mining venture. Promised we'd be rich, that he'd pay off his debts." The words felt hollow now, like lies she'd been too naive to question. Ramsey and Amos exchanged a glance that chilled her. "Sheriff," Amos said, "just tell us." "Your father wasn't investing in mines," Ramsey said. "He was moving stolen silver for the Donovan gang." The revelation struck Abigail like a fist. She gripped the table, the room spinning. The Donovan gang was infamous. A band of killers who'd robbed banks and stagecoaches from Wyoming to Arizona. Their leader, Red Jack Donovan, had a bounty that could buy half of Willow Creek. "That's impossible," she whispered. "My father was a fool, not a criminal." "It gets worse," Ramsey continued, his voice heavy. "The silver he was transporting $40,000 worth vanished the day before he died. Gone without a trace." Amos leaned forward, his face grim. "You're saying the Donovan gang thinks Abigail knows where it is?" "They're certain of it," Ramsey said. "My sources say Red Jack himself is riding this way with a dozen men. They believe Henry told his daughter where he hid the silver." Abigail's world tilted. "He didn't tell me anything. He died in that brawl. He never even said goodbye." "That won't matter to Donovan," Ramsey said. "They've killed for less, and after the auction, they know exactly where to find you." He turned to Amos. "Caldwell, you need to understand what you've stepped into. These aren't petty thieves. Red Jack once slaughtered a town for refusing him passage. If they think Abigail has their silver, they'll tear this ranch apart," Amos finished quietly. Abigail stood, her chair scraping the floor. "Then I'll leave. I won't bring this down on you." "Sit down," Amos said firmly. "You're not going anywhere." "You don't understand," her voice cracked. "These men will kill you, burn your home, destroy everything. I won't be responsible." Amos moved to the window, looking out at the ranch he'd built over the decades. When he turned back, his eyes held a resolve that silenced her. "Sheriff, how long do we have?" 2 days, maybe 3 if they rest their horses. Then we prepare." Amos opened a cabinet, revealing an arsenal of rifles, revolvers, and ammunition. "This ranch has survived Apache raids, rustlers, and worse. It's still standing because I learned to defend it." Ramsey shook his head. "This is different, Amos. The Donovan gang won't stop. Then maybe it's time they learn some things are worth dying for," Amos said softly. Abigail's eyes burned with tears. This man, a near stranger, was risking everything for her. But as she looked at his determined face, she noticed something in the cabineta leather satchel, identical to one her father had carried. If Ramsey was right about the silver, that satchel might hold the key to their survival. But touching it would mean betraying the only person who'd ever protected her. Abigail waited until Amos and Ramsey went outside to check the perimeter. Before approaching the cabinet, her hands shook as she lifted the satchel, its weight confirming her fears. Inside, wrapped in cloth, were for silver ingots, gleaming like moonlight. Her father had hidden the stolen silver in Amos's house. The man who'd shown her mercy was unknowingly harboring evidence that could see him hanged. Boots on the porch startled her. She shoved the satchel back, heart racing. Amos entered alone, his face etched with worry. "Ramsey's riding to town for reinforcements. He'll be back by dawn." Abigail nodded, guilt choking her words. The silver burned in her mind, demanding confession. Every moment she stayed silent was a lie. "Amos," she began, then faltered. How could she destroy the fragile trust between them? "What is it?" His eyes searched hers, concerned. Before she could answer, gunfire echoed across the Valley, deliberate, rhythmic shots, not random hunting fire. Amos grabbed his rifle and moved to the window. That's coming from your old homestead. Abigail's blood froze. The Donovan gang wasn't waiting. They were tearing apart her family's abandoned property, searching for the silver that lay 20 feet away. They'll come here next, Amos said, checking his ammunition. Abigail, get upstairs and barricade yourself in that room. Don't come out until I say it's safe. No, she said, stronger than she felt. I won't hide while you fight my battles. This isn't about your battles. It's about keeping you alive. More gunfire, closer now. Through the window, Abigail saw flames on the horizon, her childhood home burning. The Donovan gang was coming, destroying everything in their path. She made a choice that would either save them or doom them. Moving to the cabinet, she pulled out the satchel, her hands steady with desperate resolve. Amos, there's something you need to know. He turned, his eyes widening as she revealed the silver ingots. Your father, he said, understanding dawning. He hid it here. I just found it, Abigail said, tears falling. I'm sorry. I didn't know. Hoofbeats grew louder, and torches flickered in the darkness. Red Jack Donovan and his gang were here, and they'd kill for what Abigail held in her trembling hands. Amos took the satchel without a word of blame, his fingers testing the silver's weight. Outside, the hoofbeats became a roar as the gang surrounded the house. Abigail, he said, do you trust me? She looked into his eyes, seeing not anger, but the same resolve that had driven him to bid for her freedom. With my life. Then follow my lead. Don't let them see your fear. The front door burst open, and Red Jack Donovan stepped inside, his presence chilling the room. Smaller than she'd imagined, his eyes held a cold, predatory gleam. 6 men followed, guns drawn, their faces scarred by violence. Well, Donovan said, his voice soft and venomous. Amos Caldwell. Heard you bought yourself a prize at auction. Caldwell, Amos replied, rifle lowered but ready. You're not welcome here. Welcome's got nothing to do with it. I'm here for what's mine. Donovan's gaze found Abigail, lingering with malice. Her daddy stole something, and I want it back. Abigail stepped forward, the satchel clutched tightly. Is this what you want? Every gun swung toward her, but Donovan raised a hand, his eyes locked on the satchel. Smart girl. Hand it over, and maybe your deaths will be quick. No, Abigail said, her voice steady. I'll give you the silver, but only if you swear to leave Mr. Caldwell alone. He's innocent. Donovan laughed, a sound like breaking glass. Innocent? Nobody's innocent, girl. Your daddy learned that. Amos spoke, his voice commanding. Donovan, take the silver and go. You're wrong, Caldwell. I didn't come just for silver. I came to show what happens to those who cross me. Abigail felt the moment teetering. These men wanted blood, not just silver. But before Donovan could act, Sheriff Ramsey's voice rang out. Red Jack Donovan, you're surrounded. Come out with your hands up. Through the windows, torches revealed Ramsey and a dozen lawmen. Donovan's face twisted with rage, his finger tightening on his trigger. Amos moved first. Gunfire erupted, shattering the night. When the smoke cleared, Donovan lay dead, his gang surrendering without their leader. 3 months later, Abigail Harper became Abigail Caldwell in a wedding that drew all of Willow Creek. Standing beside the man who'd bought her freedom and given her a family, she realized that sometimes the darkest moments led to the brightest futures. The ranch, built on toil and defended with courage, became a home forged in love and protected by an unbreakable bond. In Willow Creek, they still tell the story of the rancher who bought a girl at auction and gave her something more precious than silver, a chance to choose her own path. What did you think of Abigail's choices? Would you have trusted Amos or revealed yourself to prevent bloodshed? Share your thoughts in the comments, especially on the themes of violence and injustice. How do you stand against such forces in life? Your perspective matters. Let's discuss.